Hello everyone and welcome back to the Biology and Health Bloom Institute summer course. So class 6 will be mutations and VISTA. So you might be wondering, what is VISTA? VISTA is basically a term used to classify different types of evolution methods, and it's the way we organize them, and it's an umbrella term, right? So let's get started. So what are mutations? Mutations are changes in the DNA that alter the sequence of the DNA in the organism. So they are caused by changes in DNA that can happen during DNA replication. So there are two types of mutations: somatic, which happen anywhere in the body except for the germ cells, and these mutations cannot be passed down to offspring. And then the gametic, any mutation that happens in a germ cell, these mutations can be passed down to offspring. So please write this down in your notes. And then the germ cell is anything, it's relating to the hereditary function that it can be passed down to offspring, right? So write which one cannot be passed down and which one can be passed down. So what is inheritance? Inheritance is the process of genetic information being passed down from a biological parent to a child, as seen in the diagram in the right. So you can see that the carrier father and the carrier mother have two alleles each, right? And the father has a blue allele and a purple allele. And the purple allele could be a abnormality or a disease, a genetic disease that he's carrying. And then the affected offspring gets both parts of the alleles of both parents and has a 1/4 chance of being fully affected by that abnormality. But then the carrier offspring, this is a display of their solely of their genotype, because they only carry partially that allele of the abnormality in their genes. So that means their children could possibly have a chance of having that abnormality in the future, but they don't have it right now because the blue allele is dominant, and usually healthy alleles which contain healthy genetic information are the dominant ones. And then the unaffected offspring does not have any of the abnormality gene or the allele, and thus even if he has children in the future, his children, unless his partner has like one of an abnormality of the same thing his father and mother had, then his children will not have the abnormality that his parents had, that his parents carried genetically. They did not have it. But then the daughter is the affected offspring. She got both parts of the purple allele, and thus since it's a recessive trait, then if she had to get two of those alleles to fully get the abnormality as a whole. And then both of these carrier offsprings are only carrying it genetically. Possibly their future children could have that abnormality if both sides of the parents give the allele that is purple. So both biological parents have specific traits that are passed on to their offspring. You can see this. You don't see that one of the offspring has a green allele or something that came from a random mutation from like a different part of the entire like genetic tree. But only all of these mutations or all of these inheritance are coming from either the father or the mother, right? There's nothing out of the family that's being transported to these children, and that is basically inheritance. So what is variation? Variation is the difference between individual cells or groups of organisms in the same species. It can be seen in many different characteristics that can be physical appearance, metabolism, and genes. The picture on the right shows variation in the color of many different cells. So you learned about phenotype and genotype, right? So phenotype is the outward expression of a genetic trait. So over here we cannot tell their genotype because genotype is the genetic actual code, like the back end of a coding program. But you can see like the front end, similar to a front end of a coding program, you can see their outward expression of color, and that is the variation of these cells, right? You can see some are yellow, some are black, and that's how it works, but you can't see their genetic code. And similarly, that's in inheritance, that you cannot see the genetic code of the carrier offspring, that the offspring actually carries part of that abnormality but is not affected by it because it's a recessive trait. But you can only see the dominant trait because only dominant traits are expressed, as you learned earlier. So over here, that variation can be present in species. So species is something that is that can breed fertile with each other within the same species, right? So like that's an example of species in animals. But these shells as well, which have the same genetic code, may have small differences in alleles that cause the variation of color, right? So you can see that. And this is similar to the skin color of humans, right? So fun fact, humans are 99.9% genetically identical. Only 0.1 of our genetic makeup differ. So this is a really cool fact, right? And then a review question, what are the two different types of mutations? So yes, the two different types of mutations are somatic and gametic, and one can be passed down and one cannot be passed down. And as you know, all humans had a common ancestor, which we today know were probably in Africa around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. So that's why, since we came from common ancestors, we are identical, right? So what do we know about VISTA? Let's move on. So what is VISTA? VISTA is an acronym that we use to understand how evolution works. The VISTA framework helps us identify the different steps of a trait being more and more prominent in a population, right? Similar to like what we learned earlier. And then VISTA is V for variation, and the different traits can be within a population, and they can be features, behaviors, or functions. So variation are the different traits within a population. And then inheritance is the trait passed down from parent to child. Selections is some phenotypes are able to survive better and reproduce depending on their traits, and especially their outward traits, right? Because like, remember, there was natural selection. Like if there's a beige deer in a near a hay savanna versus a black deer in the middle of a bright green forest, the tiger will always go for the deer that stands out, because the tiger doesn't want to put any effort into finding the deer that is hiding camouflaged within the savanna. So like the tiger is really lazy. So, and then T for time, the results change the allele frequency in populations over generations. So if there's a positive allele that's making a good change for the organism to survive, that organism will be able to be more successful by mating more, and it will survive for a longer time. Thus, over time, its population of its allele frequency, a percentage of its allele frequency will go up in its population in that area. And then adaptation is the surviving phenotype are better adapted for the environmental conditions in a place. And this is similar to selection, right? Because if you survive better in a place, then you're obviously better adapted to it, right? So, and then the surviving phenotype are better adapted is another word for like, the word adaptation conveys that you flow with your environment. So it's like humans are living on land, right? So humans don't have tails, and they don't have like grippers or claws like monkeys. So thus, and their legs are stronger. So thus they can walk on land with 2 feet, and thus they're adapted to the environment of the savanna, or that's how they evolved eventually, like in the savanna on ground for the environmental conditions they were. And then the monkeys would not be able to survive on the ground in like walking on plain space, right? So monkeys are adapted for trees, and humans are adapted for like grounds and savannas, because over time the prominent and the beneficial genes are more populous in a group of species in the same place. So here's a VISTA example problem. So we can use an acronym to figure out which part of VISTA is happening in an example. So the acronym, yeah. So deer with darker fur were able to hide better within trees in a forest, but they started migrating to more fields. The population in lighter colored deer increased. What part of VISTA is this example? Yes, it's natural selection, because the deer with darker fur were able to hide better within the trees, but when they started to migrate to the fields, the lighter color increased, and thus since the lighter color of the deer increased, that means that over time the positive allele went up, and the darker allele was going down, because the tigers or whatever predators were able to hunt the lighter fur ones, and the ones that had lighter fur, like the ones that had lighter fur within the group that had darker fur, they started surviving more in those areas because the tigers or whatever could not hunt them, right? And then wild bunnies normally have brown fur that allows themselves to camouflage themselves in the dirt. Sometimes a mutation occurs that changes the color of their fur to black. What is this? So this is variation, right? So variation is the different traits between in a population. So it's just normally brown fur, and then this is a small variation. So yeah, the mutation changed its fur to black, and that means that wild bunnies normally have brown fur, but sometimes there can be a black fur bunny, right? So the color of them can vary, and there's like a diverse range of colors that the bunny could possibly be. Then a bird with a higher volume of feathers are able to survive better in the colder winters. But as the climate starts to become warmer, more birds with less feathers are able to survive better, increasing the number of younger birds having less feathers. What letter of Vista does this represent? This represents inheritance, because the more birds with less feathers are able to survive better, and then since they had children, right, the children inherited those traits, because in the warm weather the birds probably had the children, and then the birds who were their children of those birds with less feathers had the positive trait that the parents had, right? So like the increasing number of younger birds means that it's the offspring. So the children are inheriting in the traits that were positively affecting the parents and allowing them to survive. So we'll take a break now. You can pause the video. And now you can do a review booklet, and basically go to this link and you can put it into your browser and you can play the game without a teacher. So yeah, thank you so much and see you next time.